Thank you for attending the Lehigh Loop Shared Use Path public meeting. We've got a huge crowd on here tonight with a lot of interested residents in the area. Excited to see what improvements are being proposed. So thank you very much for attending. What we're going to do is a short presentation, kind of show you some examples of what we're looking at design-wise that explains the project. We just ask that as we go through the presentation, if you have any questions, go ahead and enter those questions into the comment box. And then as we get to the Q&A portion of the presentation, we'll respond to those in that order. So if you see something on a particular slide that spurs some question, go ahead and enter it there. At that time, just know when we get to the Q&A is when we'll start addressing those comments. Again, my name is Kurt Albright with the City of Mesa Engineering Department Public Relations Supervisor, and I'll be monitoring today. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Michaela, our project manager.
Excellent, thank you, Kurt. So we'll go to the next slide and go through quick introductions for the project team. This project is located in District 1. We have Councilmember Freeman joining us. We also have Eric Gadarian with the City of Mesa. He's a Deputy Transportation Director. My name is Michaela Cellini. I'm the City of Mesa Project Manager for this project. Kurt Albright, as he mentioned, he's our City of Mesa Public Relations Supervisor. Dick Yano with Wood is the Project Manager. Mike Rose with Alta is our planner. And then Jason Harrington is with HP&D, and he's our landscape architect. So before we get too far into this presentation, I'd like to give Councilmember Freeman a moment to give any remarks or comments he has in relation to this project.
Thank you, Michaela. And I just wanted to point out, I appreciate all the input that we've had previously from a lot of community members and residents, but I'm excited about these shared use paths. They're important in our community. They provide, we're in partnership with Salt River Project for the connectivity and health of our community. These are funded through transportation bond funds, and consequently we can place these in the city using the existing canal structures, and that way we can help people appreciate Mesa and utilizing our canals. We have a great staff on board to help answer questions tonight, so I look forward to hearing from everybody. So thank you, Michaela, back to you.
Excellent, thank you, Councilmember. All right, a quick overview of our agenda and what we'll be going over today. We'll do a quick project overview. We'll go over the existing project site conditions, go over examples of shared use path types and examples and experiences. We'll go through the pathway design concepts, trailhead design concepts, and then at the very end, we'll go over any comments or questions we received from the attendees. For your reference, the project timeline, we're currently in active design on this project, and we're anticipating completion in the fall of this year, 2021. We're hoping for construction in early 2022, January, February timeframe, and then hopefully completing construction in the fall of 2022. And then a quick project overview just to get you oriented with where we're at on this project. This is the phase 1 of the Lehigh Loop Shared Use Pathway. We'll be starting at the Mcdowell and Lehigh Road with a trailhead right at that location, then following along the SRP South Canal towards the northeast. We'll be following that towards Valvista Drive, utilizing an underpass, which we will talk about later on in this project, to cross Valvista Drive, and then heading further northeast up along the canal still, and then turning and following along the 202 freeway towards the northwest and terminating at the Valvista Trailhead, which will be right at the cul-de-sac at Valvista Drive and the 202. So that's the phase 1 for this current project. There's a future phase 2, which you see in this kind of dashed line here. That's not a project that's currently active or planned. It's not budgeted yet, but we are anticipating some sort of alignment that will connect and make this a looped pathway once that is completed at a later date. But right now we're focusing on the phase 1 portion of this project. And with that, I'll pass it over to Dick Yano to go further into the existing conditions.
Before we run on to that next slide, let's get a little bit of the group that's on here listening. I want to get some feedback from them. Let's learn a little bit about them. So I'm going to launch a little survey here. So for those that are watching, poll will pop up and you'll be able to answer the questions that come up. We just have 2 quick questions. We want to kind of learn how you currently use this area, this pathway. Let's start that.
Did you want me to read that, Kurt?
Yes, would you?
Okay, yes, sorry. So the first question is, currently, how often do you use the existing canal pathway? And select one of the options below. So the first option is 1 to 2 times per week or more. Second option is 1 to 2 times a month. Third option is 1 to 2 times a year. And the fourth option is, I don't know yet, but I plan to use it someday.
Let that poll go for a few minutes. You still see people are voting. All right, let's see what the responses were.
All right, interesting. So we have some frequent users and some people who haven't used it yet.
That's great. Okay, one more.
All right, this next question is, when I use the existing canal path, I'm typically, and then select any that apply. You're either walking or running along the pathway, biking across the pathway, equestrian riding along the pathway, or an other mode of transportation.
Okay, I think we got pretty close to. It looks like they've voted. A few people changing their minds. We want this to be accurate. So we'll give them a minute. Okay, here's the results of that.
All right, very good information.
And that's, roughly 75 people attending or voting on this. So that's really good information for us.
Mm-hmm.
When we get to the end and get more Q&A, I'd love to find out what the other is.
Yeah, right. All right, so let's go to the next slide. There we go. All right, Dick, can you pick up from there?
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of give a review of the existing conditions. I think it's the next slide, Kurt. And we broke it up into 3 sections: the west section, the central section, and the east section. So the west section is basically along the Lehigh Crossing neighborhood with a proposed trailhead at the west end at Mcdowell, and then the access road along there. So the conditions in this area include a vacant site, which is owned by SRP currently, where we're proposing a trailhead and a parking lot that we'll go through later in the presentation. There's an existing underpass under Mcdowell that hopefully will connect to future extensions of the path going to the west. Next. So the adjacent access road adjacent to the Lehigh crossing is currently a 14 to 16 foot access road that is currently used by SRP maintenance vehicles and will continue to be used by their maintenance vehicles. It's separated from the neighborhood fence about 50 to 100 feet. It varies through there. And so it does provide separation to the neighborhood there. Next. The next section is next to Vulcan Materials, which is the material pit there. The path is continuing along the canal bank, and the next photo shows kind of existing conditions similar to the Lehigh crossing area with the canal bank above the adjacent property there. Next. So the next area is between Valvista going northeast up to the 202 and then jogging back along the 202 freeway to Valvista to propose trailhead at Valvista with the existing undercrossing of the 202 there in the middle. So this is the existing access road adjacent to the canal, just east of Valvista, looking back to the southwest, along the properties there to the north. And there are power poles along the entire corridor, as you can see there. This is a little bit further to the northeast, along the citrus groves. This area is a little bit tighter, so it's going to be one of the constrained areas of the pathway, with a narrower canal bank and slope in that area. And then as we get to 202, there's an existing undercrossing under the 202 that's all concrete paved path currently, so we would just be matching into this at that area. And then the next slide is along the 202 freeway, within the right-of-way. There's a sound wall along the freeway there at the ramp, and then there's fencing on the left side there, existing fencing with power poles. And this is all within ADOT right-of-way. And then the last slide is the proposed trailhead site at Valvista, currently owned by ADOT. They have some of their materials stored there, but the city is working with ADOT to, with an agreement to put a proposed trailhead there.
I think we have some technical difficulties there, Dick. Some of the slides may not have shown, so I'm going to scroll through that proposed parking area.
Yeah, so that's what I just mentioned, the proposed trailhead site that's currently owned by ADOT, and the city's working with the city on an agreement to put a proposed trailhead and a parking lot at that site. So with that, I'm let Mike talk about examples of pathways.
Thanks, Dick. So I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about a shared use path. So I just want to be sure that we are all on the same page as to what we're talking about when we say a shared use path, so we all know what's coming. The slide you see right now is showing you a typical cross section of a shared use path. So you can see typically it's 10 to 14 feet of asphalt. There's 2 foot of shoulder on either side. And then we always make sure we have a 10 to 12 foot vertical clearance. So next slide. Oh, there it is. It came faster than I thought. All right, so most of our pathway is going to look more like this, because this is an example of a shared use path that includes equestrian uses. So we have typically, and in our case, in our pathway, we're going to be looking at mostly 10 feet of shared asphalt use pathway, and then we're going to have 6 feet of unpaved surface for equestrian uses. And as you can see, for equestrian uses, we always make sure we have 12 feet of vertical clearance. So I want to show a few examples of pathways that you may have used or you may have seen around your community. So the first one here is the Mesa Gateway Path. This is very typical of a shared use path. We see we have a fence on one side, we have lighting on the other, and we have those 2 foot shoulders. Next, please. Here's another example of a Mesa Stadium connector path. This one looks like it's a little bit wider, and we do have a wider shoulder area for other uses. People can use that for running or something else, people who don't like to necessarily run on a paved surface. Next, please. Now, we like to make our pathways more than just a ribbon of asphalt. What really makes these things is the user experience. And our opportunities for user experience on this pathway are going to be much more at the trailheads than on the pathway themselves. And I think we'll speak about this more later, but because we are on SRP right-of-way, we don't have an opportunity to add vertical elements to this pathway. So we're talking about lights, signs, anything that's a vertical structure, we can't add on the SRP right-of-way. So we will be doing most of the enriched experiences are going to be at the trailheads, and Jason will be talking about the trailheads later. Another aspect is wayfinding and signage. In this case, we can't do vertical elements, but we can do elements that are horizontal. And we'll show examples of those in a minute. But on this slide, you see here some examples of signage and directional wayfinding things that are in and around Mesa, and some others that I've selected from some other locations just to give you a feel for what's going to come. So I'd like to get into some details of the design concept. So starting at the west end, and this is near the Lehigh community, you can see we've identified on this map on the left side some key orientation features. But then there's a couple things right underneath the pathway. You can see we've identified an embedded interpretive element, and I'll show you an example of that in just a little bit. But the thing I want to talk about now is the cross section. So you see on the right, the cross section of where the pathway will go in relation to the canal, and also where it's going to go in relation to the community. So you notice that you have an enlargement on the top, and then you have a larger image on the bottom. And the key thing I guess I really want to point out here is the dimension between the edge of the pathway and the wall that divides the Lehigh crossing community. And you can see that we are 60 feet away from that wall, which is the greatest distance we can be away from that wall and still have 16 feet of pathway. Next, please. This is a photo sim or an example of what this path may look like once it's finished. You can see we have the asphalt on one side, and then we have a crusher fine or a chat surface that would be suitable for equestrian use. And notice we're putting the equestrians away from the canal side, just in the event that we were to have a horse slip or something, we don't want them sliding into the canal. So we feel like that's some enhanced safety for our equestrian users. Next, please. So moving to the east, our design concepts are very similar, but just a bit different. I want to talk about the cross sections on the right. So the first cross section you see going left to right is the one that is near the existing orchard. And you can see, in this case, we're actually getting a lot closer to the orchard. We're about 28 feet away from that, but the overall cross section of the trail remains the same. And then after we cross under Highway 202, you can see we have a little bit of a different situation because we are no longer on the canal. We're away from the canal. So we have on the left side, we have some vegetation, and then we also have some fencing between us and the highway. So let's go to the next slide and look at that. So this is a photo sim showing what that's going to look like. And in this case, you can see we've actually added a fence between the trail and the highway itself. And then in this case, since we are no longer restricted on the use of vertical elements, we are actually adding lighting to this section of the pathway. I also want to point out, you can see we've added some mile markers actually on the ground. We're not limited by what we can do on the ground. So there's some really cool options for us to put some mile markers and some other things in there as well. So next, please. So these are examples of what we can put on the ground. So on the left side, you see photos of things that are actually on the ground in a horizontal plane and some other projects. On the right, you can see what we're proposing. And the lithomosaic is actually I think a really neat feature where you can actually make this mosaic of some kind of an image or a historical image of that means something to the community. In this case, you can see the example we have is a beach image, but what we would probably use would be, I showed a little circle there that has a picture of some orange groves or somebody picking some oranges, but there are other historical items that we could use for those lithomosaics. And we are planning to have 2 of them on the pathway, and they would be located where the access points come from the Lehigh Crossing neighborhood. The other thing you see on the right is wayfinding, and these would be very much like you actually see on the left where there's wayfinding on the ground, but these would be specific to Mesa and specific to the destinations in your community. And then on the bottom, you see these thermoplastic mile markers. And when I say thermoplastic, think of them like stickers. And we've all seen them because of the pandemic. Every time you go to the grocery store, there's a sticker on the floor for you to be 6 feet away from somebody else. These are essentially like those, but they will be on the pathway and they will have mile markers. So they will tell you how far you are away. The other nice thing about having these things on the pathway is they're a really useful way for somebody to find you if you are in need of emergency assistance. So if for some reason you fall over on your bike on the trail and you're calling for help, you can say, I'm near mile marker 1.2. So that way emergency services knows exactly where to find you. Next, please. And I'm going to hand this over to Michaela to talk about the tunnel adventure.
Great, thanks, Mike. Yes, I was calling it the saga for a while there. So initially, the pathway we were planning to cross at grade at the street level at Valvista, putting in a signalized light there for the crossing. But as we were going through our design efforts, one of the residents nearby informed us that there was actually a tunnel put in underneath Valvista Road when Valvista was constructed in 2003. And so we did some investigation work. We used one of our contractors with the city and were able to find the pathway, excavate it. We performed a structural evaluation with our consultant and confirmed that the tunnel is actually really in great shape. It was almost in the condition it was when it was put in. So we have determined that it is feasible and available for us to use for the pathway alignment. And with that, we're planning to incorporate the tunnel into our pathway instead of doing that at grade signalized crossing. So we were excited about that and we're happy to move forward with it. And then with that, I'll pass it over to Jason to go more in depth on the trailhead design concepts.
Thanks, Michaela. So each of the bookends of our trail system has a staging area for parking and for getting yourself oriented. So we have different features associated with each of the different trailheads. This is the Mcdowell Trailhead. The Mcdowell Trailhead, we're utilizing SRP's land for now. We have entrance off of Lehigh Road. We have a combination of soft surfaces for equestrian staging areas. Also, it's a green infrastructure technique. And then we also have paved asphalt surfaces. We've got plenty of parking capability for single family cars as well as trailer vehicles. Got a staging area to dismount your horses with some equestrian staging. Trash receptacle. We've got some nodes for orientation and for comfort to help create your orientation and get ready for your activity for the day. Kind of a drop-off zone there in the right side of your image that has a shade structure as well, and that'll include seating and some other site amenities. We've got a kind of a drop-off zone as well as a kiss and ride, and then kind of a congregation space option for the underpass of the Mcdowell Road that's existing today. So those are some of the kind of the key features that we'll be looking at. Again, we're embracing green infrastructure when possible. We've got some shade for cooling and comfort, shade structure as well for some more permanent shade. And then we'll provide some handicap compliant connectivity to the trail system itself. Some of those features, we've got some precedent imagery or some inspirational images on the screen now that kind of show you what we're talking about when we say pervious parking lots or seating opportunities with seat walls or benches, other site amenities such as bike racks and litter receptacles. Potentially we'll use specialty pavements as well in certain areas and provide some connectivity to trailheads for the adjacent neighborhoods. We'll include some monument signs as well for mapping and destinations along this corridor path, and try to offer up some thematic elements as part of this particular trailhead. We've got a lot of the orange groves in the area, so agriculture and citrus farming is an inspiration. Our other trailhead is the Valvista Trailhead, which is more northern, just end of the terminus of our pathway system. It's at the cul-de-sac, a little bit of a grade separation from Valvista to the lower parking area. A little less capacity for parking at this particular area, but it's very similar to the Mcdowell Trailhead where we're embracing green infrastructure where possible. We're trying to do some rainwater harvesting in the planter island adjacent to all the pavements for the entrance road and the drop-off zone. This area also has some staging for equestrians. In this particular area, the soft surface parking will be more of a parallel parking or kind of a pull-through parking condition where we have a dedicated node for mounting and dismounting of horses, as well as a paddock or a corral for staging. Litter receptacles will be part of it, as well as other site furnishings, trash bin. In this particular case, we also have a lot of existing facilities that we have to integrate into our particular area. There's a cell phone tower, as well as a pump station. But we've got staging nodes areas for starting up your path. They're very thematic. In this case, instead of the citrus theme, we're looking at wildlife and habitat as inspirational features. We've got a batwing shade structure and some custom pavements at some of the key trailhead areas. Like the other one, we'll also have some monumentation signs and some other wayfinding elements as part of the palette of materials. You can again see some of the inspirational images that we're looking at. We're not replicating these images. They're just ideas that would help inspire us for potential parking solutions, custom colored pavements, wayfinding elements, and other shade structures that would help us as we craft the final designs for this particular trailhead.
All right, thank you very much. So that's the gist of the presentation as far as the slides go. It's time to go through the comments. We've been getting some questions rolling in from the attendees here. So just some ground rules with that. Please just enter your comments in the chat window there. We'll read them through. And then the panel here will respond to those. Just keep them as concise as you can about this project specific, and we'll go through those questions. The first one has to do with the distance. What is the length of the pathway from end to end, this specific pathway?
Michaela, do you have that off the top of your head?
I wanted to say 2.4, but I wanted to double check it and make sure that was right. It's a little over 2 miles.
Yeah, I think we've been focused on getting the alignment, but it'll be somewhere between 2 and 2.5 miles.
Yeah, being early on in the design, it probably hasn't been mapped out completely, but roughly 2.4 miles. That's good. Question came in about some of the wayfinding. So the thermoplastic stickers that we talked about earlier, Mike, how's the Arizona heat going to affect those from being peeled off or fading?
That's a good question, and that's something we thought about. We have had installed. Well, first of all, there's thermoplastic is already used in Arizona, and you see the thermoplastic. You know, it's common to see on streets or in a number of different places. So thermoplastic certainly does work in Arizona. The detail that we're putting into these is a little bit unique, and you know, the examples we've seen where this has been used in the past is you're going to get, you know, probably somewhere between a 3 to 5 year life out of these things, depending on the amount of traffic and the amount of, you know, UV rays that hit it over time. But a 3 to 5 year lifespan is pretty good for this kind of thing. And the other fun part about that is, in 5 years, if you have to replace it, you can design the new theme for your wayfinding if you choose to.
So I'll add on to that. We've used this type of material on the stadium connector pathway in Northwest Mesa, and yeah, we used the Cubs and A's logos as part of this, and we got about 3 years, and we're actually going through the process of replacing them now.
Good. So I had some questions coming about the tunnel, so I'm going to go back to that slide so you can see it as we answer these two questions. Tell us about what, if any, lighting will be in the tunnel and the various tunnels throughout the project.
Yeah, I can take that one. We're proposing LED lighting. The 202 tunnel, the existing one, does have lighting in it. We're going to evaluate that and potentially upgrade it if needed. But this existing tunnel under Valvista would also have lighting in it, and it'd be LED, so it'd be plenty bright and provide that safety element to the pathway.
And it will be on 24 hours a day.
Correct.
Yes.
Great. All right, sticking with the tunnel. Since the tunnel is already 18 years old, what if problems arise in the future? Obviously, it looks like it's in pretty good shape, but who is responsible for the maintenance? Is it the city of Mesa? Is it local residents? How is that going to be addressed in the future if issues arise?
So that would be maintained by the city of Mesa. We would be the owners of that tunnel, and we would address any maintenance concerns as they arose on the project. But yeah, just to reiterate, with our current structural evaluation, everything looked in really good condition. There didn't appear to be any sort of damage or cracking or anything to be of concern.
Let's talk about maintenance of the trail itself. So obviously, with being a shared use path, you're gonna have horses, people with pets. How is it maintained? Is there any type of maintenance schedule, picking up any kind of mess that gets left behind, things like that?
Sure, I'll take that. We have all of our shared use paths on a maintenance schedule, depending where they are in the city. So we as a transportation department will be responsible for the pathway, and we'll develop that schedule for trash pickup, for sweeping, to keep the asphalt clean, to then also pick up waste also.
I think the transportation even has their own sweepers and things like that.
Yeah, I was just going to mention we have specialized sweepers that are smaller that you know, won't be the street sweeper that comes through your neighborhood or you see out on the roadways, but these are smaller sweepers specifically designed for pathways and smaller areas.
Right. And like Jason was pointing out, there's trash receptacles also at the nodes, so there's some opportunity for that as well.
Right. I was going to mention, I can't remember the name of the app. Is it where you can report that there are like maintenance items of concern, or a street lights out, or graffiti that needs to be corrected?
The Mesa Now app.
Thank you. I was going to say Mesa Now. I didn't want to be wrong. Okay. Yeah, that's something that you're able to use and let
Very
us know
helpful.
if maintenance is needed. Thank you.
Yeah. So this slide is showing some of the connections to Lehigh Crossing. We've had several questions coming from there, so let's start addressing those. As far as security, is this pathway being that is somewhat close to this neighborhood here, especially in this area? Is there any kind of scheduled patrol of this? Is this a see something, say something? How is that going to be?
I can take that. We don't have, in the city of Mesa, we don't have regular patrols of our pathways. So it's more the see something, say something, or to call it in.
Okay. Kurt, I'll add to that. This is an active canal bank where the Zanjeros will be going up and down the canal bank. So SRP employees will be there as well. So, and they also do have Anderson Security monitoring the canal banks. So SRP does that on their own, and again, the Zanjeros. So if there's anything amiss, they do call it in, and as residents and community members, we're entitled to do the same. Thanks.
Very good. We talk about the access to the Lehigh Crossing. There's been several questions about what does it look like? Is it asphalt pavement? Is it concrete where it connects? Maybe we can talk about that.
Sure. So I can take that one on. Right now, we're planning for it to be a concrete connection, and it would also be ADA compliant. It's our understanding the existing pathway within the Lehigh community is concrete, so we would use concrete to tie into the asphalt pathway up at the top of the bank.
Very good. And you mentioned ADA access. We did have some questions about that for wheelchair access, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Will this entire pathway, including the trailheads, be ADA accessible?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Dick had talked about some of the slopes. And I think Jason, you even mentioned it too. There are some areas that have some slopes, and so the trail is going to be built to accommodate that. So we're staying within those guidelines. Good.
Yeah, there will be some steeper slopes like into the Mcdowell Trailhead and then down to those Lehigh connections, but they'll all be within the compliance with ADA requirements.
So talking more about access and whether or not they'll be gated, will the trailheads be closed up at night, or the trail itself, does it have any kind of hours that people are not allowed to be on there?
As far as the trail itself, no, we don't have gates or anything to close trails on a daily basis. So it's a 24-hour access.
And do we have any gates planned at either of the trailheads as well?
We do not at this time.
So this is the Mcdowell Trailhead. Some of the questions we're asking if these would be gated. So this just kind of rendering just shows that area that's remains open, accessible for parking and everything else. Okay, connectivities is a few questions that came in. Does this path go to anywhere? It seems like it's just kind of floating in an area. Are there other bike paths or bike lanes that will connect to this?
It's a great question. I'll take it. It looks like it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. And this is the first phase. We talked about the second phase of the Lehigh loop to create a loop here. But ultimately, the city of Mesa also has greater aspirations for the shared youth path network in Mesa. And ultimately, this will connect further south on the South Canal and connect into our existing bike network along the Consolidated Canal. And there's also been some discussions about trying to create a pathway further to the north here, where we turn left under the 202 to continue it up the canal. That will take the cooperation of Maricopa County and also the Indian community. But this is just the first phase of a much bigger master plan.
Great. So that really kind of addresses connectivity to other pathways, but along those same lines, you know, there's pathways even through other cities like Tempe, as you go south into Gilbert. Is the idea to have a connectivity through different cities like this in the future? Is that kind of the idea?
So our existing pathway along the Consolidated Canal connects into Tempe and into Gilbert. This pathway ultimately down the South Canal will connect into that pathway. So you will be able to reach multiple communities.
Kurt, can I add to that what Eric has said?
Please.
So I appreciate everybody listening. The connectivity to these canal paths is critical. This one is unique because it will provide underground tunnels to go from McKellips between Stapley and Horn. Unfortunately, you have to cross over the canal, but there's a future canal path coming at McKellips between, again, Stapley and Horn, correct, Eric?
Yes.
And so there will be a pedestrian or a hawk or a stoplight there, but then you can go uninterrupted from there, McKellips, all the way to Granite Reef Dam and using the canal bank. So you could go 9 miles, I think at 9 or 11 miles, all the way up to Granite Reef and back. Have a great look at the scenery. That's part of the connectivity. And then we're looking at connectivity at Lehigh Falls, the Eastern Canal, because as the Consolidated South comes west, it splits, and the Consolidated South continues towards Horn and Brown. But then the Eastern Canal takes off and goes around. So we're working on some connectivity there for future development. Is that right, Eric? Did you want to expand on that?
I think that's great. Thank you.
Okay.
That really did kind of hit on some of the other questions about that. You know, Councilmember Freeman, you talked about how you, instead of turning left and going towards the trailhead at Valvista, you could continue on that path, and maybe something in the future would expand that more of the pathway as alone just the canal path itself. So those are some things looking at. There's been a few questions asking if that's been looked into. So yes, and we will go through that same process as well. This phase, voter approved in the process right now, is just kind of really the tip of the iceberg. So in the future, you see that kind of stuff come along, keep pushing for that. So that really kind of also addresses one of the questions about that pinch point that was labeled there, the northern end that goes along the 202. So I think those other routes are going to help with that. There's been some concern on some of the comments about horse and bike and pedestrians all in that kind of smaller area. So these other alternate directions will help with that. Okay, sticking with some of the security and visibility. So few of the questions came in from the Lehigh Crossing neighborhood. You know, the canal bank is elevated, having that pathway there. There's a small site wall. One, who owns that site wall separating the SRP property from the Lehigh Crossing neighborhood? And two, who maintains that?
Kurt, can you say the location of that site wall again?
So it borders on the southern end of Lehigh Crossing, and it's the site wall that separates the SRP and the canal land from Lehigh Crossing neighborhood. There's a site wall there. Is that SRP's or is that Lehigh Crossings?
To me, that would be Lehigh Crossings. SRP does not have any site walls.
That would be my guess too, Councilmember Freeman.
Yeah, those are constructed to separate that community when it was first built. So that the development put that wall in, they maintain it and own it, HOA there. How about visibility? Being that the pathway is there, there's some concern about the height of that wall and visibility into people's yards. Is that being looked at all as far as any additional screening, or what are we doing to keep that separation?
I can touch on that a little bit, but in our initial design efforts and scoping, even though this is a City of Mesa pathway, this is being placed within the SRP right of way and the Bureau of Reclamation right of way. So we are adhering to their requirements. And one of the requirements with this being an active SRP maintenance road is we cannot have any vertical elements along the pathway that would be impeding any of their maintenance vehicle traffic. So unfortunately, we are not able to install any screening or additional vegetation or anything of that nature. The other portion of it is that the Bureau of Reclamation had a mandate that any vegetation along their canal banks needed to be removed, as it was a stability concern and potential to compromise the canal bank. So that was kind of a safety item, and that's why that was taken care of by SRP earlier on last year.
That does tie into, because there were some questions about that maintenance of the site wall. From time to time, there's vandalism, graffiti, different things that the residents in the area have seen. Who would take care of any graffiti along this pathway?
That would be part of the transportation department's maintenance activity. We have a full-time graffiti crew, a graffiti abatement crew that when it's called in or you use the app to report it, we'll be out within 24 hours to take care of that.
And just a note with the app, Eric, is it geolocates the picture, so you know staff exactly knows where to go.
So some comments about lighting, both sides of it. Some people are, opposed to having any lighting upon the canal there behind the neighborhood, which we addressed. We can't have any lighting there. Talked about the lighting in the underpasses themselves. But what about having any kind of lighting down on the ground, like anything that's mounted, LED strips or anything to kind of mark the pathway at night? Is there any talk or discussion about that?
I think we had some initial discussion about it. The maintenance of that type of lighting and getting it installed, it was cost prohibitive, and so we've gone away from that and left the section along the canal kind of unlit.
There have been some comments about that, like in the comment about the dark skies. So you can see both sides of that comment there. So that's good.
It's interesting because most of our trail is on SRP property, but once we turn up by Tyler Farms here and are on ADOT property, ADOT requires lighting along their pathways, and so we really do have to adhere to who the ultimate property owner is and some of their wishes.
Right. I'm going to pull up the trailhead at Valvista. I had some questions on that. Are there going to be any gated or open access to get out and to be able to travel some of the trails that are in the area along the Salt River from this location?
That's a good question. Most of those gates will come with the phase 2 of this project. As some of you may know, there are wild horses on the Indian community land and in the Salt River Basin. So we can't have open gates right now, or they escape out. A few years ago, a few of those horses made their way onto the 202. So as of right now, we're proposing that this trailhead will be secure, or the fence line will be secure around it, and you'll use it to then just access the trail. We will open more of that up with phase 2 of the Lehigh Loop shared use path.
So some of the comments that came in, I'll just touch upon real quick about that vegetation. We've got a few more. I know we addressed that quite a bit, but there were some areas that appear to have some damage. And so we would encourage you to just reach out to SRP. If there was something there, if they're made aware of it, I'm sure they'll come in and do some necessary grading or something like that. So if there is something in that SRP land, there's stickers out there. You can call SRP direct and have that addressed. But a few people mentioned that when they did that vegetation removal, they saw some things that was unpleasant. So they can be contacted.
Kurt, just they can send an email to my office and I'll facilitate that with SRP.
Great, thank you, Councilmember Freeman.
And just to note, that portion of the canal from Valvista to Mcdowell is a holding trough. I'll use the word trough for water placement for the Valvista water treatment plant. So that water is deeper and in that portion of the canal, and the Bureau of Reclamation required SRP to remove the vegetation. They didn't want the vegetation to somehow puncture the gunite in the canal, and then we have Humpty Dumpty sitting on the wall trying to stop a leak. So it may sound weird, but that was one of the reasons pre-COVID that the vegetation was removed. The BOR did not want any vegetation penetrating the canal bank.
A few more questions about the connectivity. We talked about those future phases. We've addressed quite a bit of that at length, but still some interesting questions though. Is there going to be a future phase that connects to neighboring communities? A few were mentioned were Lehigh itself to the west, and some other communities to the south. When we go through the process of that design, when it does come up, we'll be going through the outreach just like we're doing now to get that input. So we want to there are a lot of questions here we want to address, but there will be an opportunity for that when the time does come for that in the future. Go along with that, can we talk a little bit about the bond that was passed for this? There's been some questions. One, was there any kind of vote for this? So maybe we can talk about the bond process and how that gets approved by voters, and then what happens in council. Can we just briefly touch on that?
I'll go ahead. I guess I'll start, and if anybody wants to jump in. So this was part of the 2018 Parks Bond election, and as part of that process, there were obviously, if it was parks, there were parks projects, and then the shared use paths also got included in as part of this process. This is something that works its way all the way up and has to be approved by city council. And as part of that, we looked at a list of projects, and you can imagine the list of projects was longer than what was actually on the bond list. You know, those projects, you know, city council and city management identified kind of what the priorities were for that bond package, and that package then went to election in 2018 that the City of Mesa residents would vote upon. As part of that, there was a list of proposed projects that would be included in the bond, and this is one of those projects.
Good. Is it true that motorized vehicles are prohibited from using this path, and how do we keep them off? In addition, is there going to be any fencing between the canal and the path?
Those are good questions. Motor vehicles are prohibited on the pathway. We don't, I mean, but it's, once again, it's, you would have to call that in. There's not really a way as far as getting, you know, prohibiting electric scooters or ATV use besides calling it in. We will have bollards we do have bollards on our pathways at certain locations. What was the second question? Sorry.
If there be any kind of barrier or fence separating the canal from the path?
And because it's an active canal bank and SRP uses this as a maintenance road, there won't be any sort of barrier or fence or wall between the pathway and the canal bank. We don't have a barrier anywhere else in the city. We have a pathway all along the consolidated canal and sections of the Eastern Canal, and it works fine.
And it's nice to have that pathway that really delineates. You know, it's going to have the shoulders, asphalt path, and you can really choose where you travel on that. Stay away from the edge, things like that. So there's been some questions about how there's a way to view this video or the presentation. And yes, we'll get to that here in just a couple more minutes. There are quite a few more questions that I want to try to hit on before we move into that portion. So sit tight for one more second. Regarding the trailheads and the pathway, we're seeing this design tonight. A few questions are asking, is this the final design? Or how do we address the comments that are coming in now to incorporate into the design? And will there be a future meeting on that?
So I can start the answer on that one. And yeah, like Eric said, if anyone else wants to chime in, please feel free. These are not the final design plans. These are still kind of in the 60% design stage right now. So we are still tweaking it and adjusting things as needed as we start or progressing through the design. We will definitely be capturing all the comments and questions received from this public meeting, and coming up, I think Kurt, you said that we'll put together kind of a table that shows our responses more formally to the questions that were asked tonight, and then we'll see what we're able to accommodate in our design as far as what was brought up and considerations to take into.
Yeah, that's why these meetings are so important. We take these comments and we address here what we can, but there's other comments that aren't necessarily questions that come in, asking, can you include this element? Can you do that? And that's really the process that we'll take to the design team and see what we can fit in the budget, what fits in the project.
Right. And then I think the other part is if there was another meeting, we were originally anticipating a second public meeting, but we don't have a date set for that yet. But if warranted, we can definitely have another meeting once we are more close to the final design and getting this out for bid for construction.
Yeah. And that's why we want everybody's comments. So they're seeing a presentation now. You can see kind of the design elements we're looking at, get their feedback, and then they'll address those. Okay. I've been scrolling through a few of these images because there's been a few questions asking to go back to certain images. So I'm just doing that as we're talking. That's why some of these are being changed. How about the height of these tunnels? We talk about the height of them, and also how many were there or are there?
So right now there's 2 tunnels that will be used for the pathway. The first one that we mentioned that we discovered underneath Valvista Road is a 12-foot by 12-foot box that was placed again when the Valvista Road was improved back in the early 2000s. And then I'm not sure the height on this existing tunnel that's crossing underneath the ADOT 202.
Looks like it's 13 feet 8
Oh, okay.
inches.
You can see that. Excellent.
Yeah. And then, as we talked about, see something, say something. There's, you know, as you're going through the path, and we have, like, Councilmember Freeman talked about the Zanjeros that are in the area. But really, if there's something that's going on that needs to be addressed, please let people know. Use the Mesa Now app, things like that. And that's really how some of these concerns or questions came in about maybe transients that may be in the area or somebody doing something that shouldn't be. If the public is seeing that, say something, and we can really step up patrols and look at those. So that addresses a few of those comments. And don't forget about that Mesa Now app. Maybe some potential for some signage, you know, to call for if there's issues. I'm gonna scroll through here and just see if I've missed any others. All right, last couple here. We're going to go back to the trailheads regarding parking. Just want to explain a little bit more on what some of these call outs are referencing. We'll start at McDowell. And we can talk about what the various parking locations are. I know we've seen this a few times, but help elaborate how to get in and out and what the different parking areas are for.
Sure, I'll take this one, Kurt. So the keynote number 7 there is where the car parking would occur. And we're looking at trying to do a pervious pavement so we can rainwater harvest and minimize some of our drainage infrastructure. Number 3 is for trailered vehicles, things that like an equestrian would bring their horse trailer along, or you know, if there's multiple bike riders and they want to do kind of a gang ride event and they've got dedicated trailers. We have trailer pull through at a convenient angle to circulate through there. So those are the 2 primary parking areas for the Mcdowell Trailhead that we've identified.
And are these the connecting pathways? Is that what these represent, these nodes here? Is this?
Yeah, and I kind of want to revisit that previous question. These are concepts, so these are the first pass ideas. Once we get the survey with our 60% package that is underway, the technical information for grades and things like that will steer our solution a little bit. We've got some input from SRP from their maintenance perspective. So from a concept level, we'll advance this to a preliminary design for constructability. The city will go through several iterations of review process before we get to a final engineered design solution that can be constructed.
And I'm going to pull up the Valvista one as well. We can point out where those connections are to the path and the parking.
On this one, we're very limited with space and availability. You see a lot of existing infrastructure with the cell phone tower and some other facilities in place. The blue line is where the existing fence is today. And in order for us to get emergency service vehicles in there and be able to navigate, turn around, same way with a trailered vehicle for again, for the equestrians and other, you know, bicycles and other larger group trailered vehicles. We need to expand that fence a little bit, and we're trying to minimize that footprint. So the yellow line shows the new proposed fence adjustment. Again, this is ADOT land, so they're being a good design partner with us with some of this availability of space. So we do have less parking capacity here, but there's other site constraints that are driving that factor as well. Again, the keynote 7, ironically, it's the same number, is the porous surface LID, low impact development. So again, we're trying to rainwater harvest and minimize some infrastructure for drainage for that parking area. And then there's a little bit more limited space for the equestrian and the trailers, which is keynote 3 that you see there. Again, we're trying to minimize hardscape for urban heat island. So we're using an aggregate based parking staging area for the equestrians.
Yeah, some of the comments, especially about this particular one, you know, if it's the local area, it seems like there's some more space. There were some questions about where they can be expanded and maybe have other facilities or food truck events or larger gatherings. There's been a couple of questions on that specifically. Eric, that might be something you could probably touch on a little bit, whether or not maybe in the future this is expanding or if there's been any discussion about that.
I guess it's a comment we've heard as we've gone throughout this design process, and we don't have the budget to include something like that in this first phase. I think it's something that we as a city are going to have to look at as we go into the phase 2 of the project, whether that's something that we can accommodate here or not.
Okay. Any bathrooms at the trailheads or water for horses? Is that part of the design, or is that something that's been looked at?
So unfortunately, at this time, we don't have the funding available to incorporate any restrooms or water or watering troughs or anything of that nature. So we're not anticipating including those types of amenities at the trailheads or along the pathway.
We've had meetings with the equestrian users and out here in Lehigh, and none of them were favorable or said they would use watering troughs. So we've taken that out also.
Mm-hmm.
Those are some of the questions asked, that if there had been some outreach, I mean, it's a shared use path. There's obviously going to be some equestrians, especially with so much close by, where they can access different parts of this area. But yeah, generally we've been hearing that as people that are doing that, they're bringing their own water, and there's could be some issues with that, contamination, things like that. So thanks for touching on that. Yes, we have done quite a bit of outreach with the equestrian users group to get their comments on the things you're seeing here, and still will. So a question, we talked about the fencing here at this trailhead. What about down at Mcdowell and Lehigh Road? Say someone has they're offloading their horse and something happens, they get loose. Is there any fencing in this area to help stop that, or cattle guards or things like that?
I'll let Jason correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe we're planning any fencing at that location.
SRP has some limited fencing in the area, especially along the canal itself and the embankment. There is some fencing present today along Lehigh. Again, it's limited, but we won't have any gated entrances at this time. It's not proposed. Again, that addition of some type of enclosure or perimeter would be something that might be considered by Mesa staff.
I think especially at this location, it really does sit down in a bowl. It's lower than Lehigh Road. It's lower than Mcdowell and the canal. So the area is pretty self-contained.
Yeah, another issue at this site is SRP does need to get down to the existing tunnel under McDowell, so they'll be actually accessing a lot of these connections, so it can't be restricted with fencing or anything like that at this location.
Good. So maybe that's something we can look at then. As far as this location, there are several comments about that fencing or cattle guard might help. Maybe even if that's the entrance or something like that, but having that bowl might help from the vegetation. But there are a few questions and comments about that, especially connectivity to the underpass you're just talking about. Let's talk about timeline one more time. We've had a couple of questions on that as we start to wrap up. Go back to that slide, and if Michaela, you want to talk about that?
Sure. So yeah, I'm not sure if there were specific questions on it, but we're currently in design, planning to have our final design sets by September, so we can release for bid and get a contractor awarded. And then by the time we get them under contract for construction activities, we're anticipating them actually physically starting work on site in early 2022. We're targeting January or February, and we anticipate construction being anywhere from 10 to maybe 12 months. So we're saying fall of 2022, just to be a little conservative.
Yeah. And again, phase 2 is not something that's currently designed yet. We don't have any funding for it, but the more we hear from the public about what they want in there, that helps definitely for programming the stuff in the future. So
right.
There have been a lot of comments about that. So please stay tuned for that. We'll be doing outreach when the time comes. And so as long as we're hearing from the residents that that's something they want, I'm sure the city will start looking towards that. Just want to double check a few more here. Some of these that rolled in, I believe we just responded to. Just want to double check to make sure they've answered all these questions. Oh, okay, here's one missed. This is really interesting. We talked about some of the wayfinding and some of the design for artwork and different interpretive things. What about doing some type of art commission for the tunnels or having some art done in there or in the general area? Is that something that's been looked at?
I can take that. That's a great question. We have not explored that as part of this project, but we have experience with that. We have a tunnel as part of the stadium connector project over by the Cubs Stadium, and we actually commissioned an artist to do artwork there after the pathway opened, and it's been well received. I think it's a great idea, and it's something we can look at and expand upon.
And then finally, is asphalt the best surface for this? Questions about, is it the surface going to be too hot to be used? Is there other things to be looked at, especially cost? It's concerned, cost per mile, is that really the most effective? And is that the best design for this type of path?
So that follows our typical pathway standards using an asphalt pavement section. And then the other component of that is this is still an active SRP maintenance road. So we need to use a material that is able to withstand the equipment that will be used by SRP while this is still being used as a pathway. So that was also something that lent itself towards the asphalt material selection.
Okay, we'll address that. The questions, we talked about some signage and things like that. So those are really good comments that we'll be looking at. We talked about lighting on the trail, how we can't have that on SRP, but we'll have lighting in the tunnels. One of the comments about the existing trail now, it appears to have some type of asphalt. So they've been using gravel surfaces they've seen in other areas and not asphalt. I know there's been discussion since this is shared use, and the comments we've gotten from different groups, the bicyclists and different things, that we got to have a surface that kind of accommodates both.
Right. And the current surface is millings that was installed by SRP.
So, okay, so it's not asphalt.
Millings, yeah.
Gotcha. Just maybe compacted in, and over time that degrades.
Right.
So. And then we also have that large shoulder throughout a lot of the project. We have not only the equestrian, but the existing dirt shoulder throughout a large section of that. Okay, so these comments have been super helpful. Thank you for submitting those. We'll get these bundled up and over to this design group to review and start addressing some of the comments that have come through and see what areas we can update with that, and we'll move forward with that. Any other questions? What I want to point out here as we close, there's still ways you can email us and send any comments that may come up as you go to bed tonight and you wake up tomorrow thinking I should ask that question. You'll be emailed a survey. Please input in that. We take all this information and review all of it. So there's been a lot of really good comments, and we've been spending quite a bit of time meeting with different groups or question groups that use this area, that have board members available that we've communicated with, and also the HOA groups that are in that area. Now you, the public, and so that outreach and that getting all these comments combined still will continue for the next few weeks. So please keep sending your comments through either the survey that you'll be emailed. It'll also pop up as the meeting closes if you wish to put something else in there. You can email us. You can see it there on your screen, engineering.info@mesaaz.gov. And if you email us directly, please include Lehigh Lube in the subject line so we don't we can kind of combine them all together and know that you're talking about specifically about this. Another way, if you just have quick questions and you want to chat about it, you can always call our office here. My number is directly right there on the screen, 644-3800, and give us a call and we'll find out the answer or be able to take your comments down that way. With that, we're going to go ahead and close. I want to thank everybody for spending the time. Sorry it went a little long, but there's been really a lot of great comments, and appreciate everybody's time tonight, spending it with us tonight, and the panel members and all the residents that attended. With that, we'll go ahead and close. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.